"Get the hell out of my face, Lieutenant, now!" The voice on the other end of the phone was gravel mixed with broken glass. It was a voice that had barked orders in the frozen mountains of Afghanistan and whispered encouragement in the sweltering jungles of the Philippines. It was the voice of Master Chief Petty Officer Michael Gunner Henderson, retired, and it was a voice that hadn't lost 1 ounce of its authority. "Master Chief, with all due respect, I can't do that," the younger man's voice replied, laced with a nervous, bureaucratic stiffness. "Your son, Petty Officer Henderson, was involved in a minor training accident. He's fine. A few bumps and bruises. Standard procedure dictates." Procedure. Gunner's laugh was a harsh, bitter bark that echoed in his small, quiet workshop in the hills outside San Diego. He stared at the half-finished custom rifle on his workbench, the scent of gun oil and steel filling the air. "Let me tell you about procedure, Lieutenant Commander Evans. Procedure is what gets men killed when common sense takes a holiday. My son is a Navy SEAL. He doesn't get minor training accidents that require his platoon commander to call me with a story that sounds like it was written by a damn lawyer. Now you have 2 options. You can put my son on this phone right now, or you can prepare to explain to the base commander, a man I used to make cry in the mud pits of Buddy S., why his top Master Chief is about to personally dismantle your chain of command. One link at a time, your choice." A tense silence stretched across the line, thick with unspoken threats. Gunner could practically hear the officer sweating, weighing the career-ending potential of either decision. Finally, Evans cleared his throat. "He's unavailable at the moment, Master Chief. He's in the infirmary for observation. I'll have him call you as soon as he's cleared." The line clicked dead. Gunner slowly lowered the phone, his knuckles white. "Unavailable. Infirmary." The words were ice picks in his gut. His son, Ethan, was tough. He was his father's son. He'd gone through the legendary brutality of basic underwater demolition, SEAL training without a whisper of complaint. He'd excelled. He was living the dream he'd had since he was a boy, watching his father pack his sea bag for another trip to some godforsaken corner of the world. Ethan didn't do minor accidents, and SEAL platoon commanders didn't personally call fathers with flimsy excuses unless they were covering something up, something big. He looked around the workshop at the framed photos on the wall. Gunner with his swim buddy, grinning, covered in mud. Gunner receiving a medal, his face grim. Gunner holding a tiny Ethan, who was clutching a toy soldier. For 25 years, he had served in the teams. He had been a warrior, a leader, a mentor. He had bled for the gold trident pinned to his chest. But in that moment, as the California sun streamed through the window, he was not Master Chief Henderson. He was a father. And a cold, primal fear, colder than any Arctic water he'd ever dived in, was wrapping itself around his heart. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. The custom rifle lay unfinished on the bench. The tranquil quiet of his retirement was shattered. He was a man who had walked away from the war, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the war had just found its way to his front door, and it was wearing his son's face. He walked out of his workshop, the controlled calm of the retired warrior stripped away, replaced by the barely contained fury of a father who smelled a lie. He was heading for Coronado, the heart of the West Coast SEAL teams. He was heading into the storm. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he would burn the whole goddamn place to the ground to get to the truth. The drive to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was a blur of sun-drenched freeways and gnawing anxiety. Every billboard, every palm tree, was just background noise to the roaring engine of doubt in Gunner's mind. He knew this base better than his own backyard. He knew its rhythms, its secrets, the way the salt-laced air tasted at dawn when the grinder was full of hopefuls getting tortured into shape. But today, driving through the main gate, flashing his retiree ID to a young sailor who straightened up instantly upon recognizing the legendary name, the place felt alien, hostile. His first stop was SEAL Team 5's compound. It was a cluster of sterile, functional buildings where the deadliest men on the planet planned missions, cleaned weapons, and lived their lives in the shadows. He found Lieutenant Commander Evans in his office, a space that was far too neat and organized for a combat unit's headquarters. Evans was young, with the sharp, ambitious look of an officer who saw the teams as a stepping stone, not a home. He stood when Gunner entered, but the gesture was more defensive than respectful. "Master Chief Henderson, this is an unexpected visit," Evans said, forcing a tight smile. "My son," Gunner said, his voice flat, dispensing with pleasantries. I want to see him. As I said on the phone, he's in the infirmary. A concussion from a hard landing during a parachute jump. We're just being cautious. Doctor's orders, Evans recited, his eyes flicking away for a split second. It was all the confirmation Gunner needed. Parachute jumps were routine. Concussions from them were not, unless something went catastrophically wrong. And if it had, there would be a full safety stand down, an investigation. The base would be buzzing. It wasn't. I've made more jumps than you've had hot meals, Commander, Gunner said, his voice dropping low. A hard landing that causes a concussion means a bad shoot, a collision, or a botched PLF. Any of those happens, this whole compound is crawling with investigators, but it's quiet to quiet. So, let's try again. What happened to my son? Evans's jaw tightened. The official report stands. Master Chief, it was a training accident. The official report is garbage, and you know it. Gunner took a step closer, his presence seeming to suck the air out of the small office. I know every man on your team has a phone. I've called Ethan's phone a dozen times. It goes straight to voicemail. Funny, for a man who is just under observation. Just then, a shadow fell across the doorway. Senior Chief Petty Officer Rex Thorne stood there, filling the frame. Thorne was a monolith of a man, with a shaved head, a thick neck, and a trident tattooed on his forearm that was as faded and scarred as his reputation. His nickname was Tyrant, and it was well earned. He was from the old school, a believer that pain was the only true teacher, and that mercy was a weakness. He looked at Gunner with cold, flat eyes. Problem. LCDR. Thorne's voice was a low rumble. No problem, Senior Chief, Evans said, clearly relieved by the interruption. Master Chief Henderson was just expressing some fatherly concern. Thorne gave Gunner a slow, insolent once-over. Your boy's tough, Gunner, but he's still new. Still learning the difference between what they teach you at Bud AS and what it takes to survive out there. Sometimes, the lessons are hard. He'll walk it off. The condescension was a physical blow. Thorne was talking to him like he was some worried civilian, not the man who had written half the training manuals Thorne probably still used. In Thorne's eyes, Gunner saw it all, a deep-seated resentment for the new generation, a cruel satisfaction in his own brutal methods, and a flicker of something else, a warning. Back off. Gunner ignored him, keeping his eyes locked on Evans. The infirmary. I'm going there now. I'll have to escort you, Evans said quickly. Protocol. You do that, Gunner said, turning his back on Thorne and walking out. The walk to the infirmary was a silent war. Evans trotted to keep up, sputtering about regulations, while Gunner moved with the relentless pace of a freight train. He saw a few of Ethan's platoon mates outside the barracks. They saw him, and their eyes widened. They immediately found something interesting to look at on the ground, on the wall, anywhere but at him. That was the most damning evidence of all. SEALs were a brotherhood. If one of their own was hurt in a legitimate accident, they'd be at the infirmary, cracking jokes, smuggling in contraband snacks. They wouldn't be scattering like cockroaches in the light. The infirmary was a quiet, sterile place that smelled of antiseptic. A doctor, a young Navy lieutenant, met them at the door. He can't have visitors, he needs rest. I'm not a visitor. I'm his father, Gunner said, pushing past him. He found Ethan in a private room, lying on a cot. The official story was a concussion. But Gunner's eyes, trained over decades to assess threats and spot details, saw more. He saw the faint, purple-green shadow of a bruise high on his son's cheekbone, partially hidden by his hair. He saw the way Ethan's left eye was slightly puffy, and the raw, scraped skin on his knuckles when his hand lay on the sheet. But worst of all, he saw the look in Ethan's eyes when he saw him. It wasn't relief, it was fear. Dad, what are you doing here? Ethan tried to sit up, but winced and fell back. Evans said there was an accident, Gunner said, his voice gentle now. All the fury banked. Yeah, just a rough landing. I zigged when I should have zagged, Ethan said, the words sounding rehearsed. He wouldn't meet Gunner's gaze. Gunner sat on the edge of the cot. Evans and the doctor hovered in the doorway like vultures. Your knuckles, Gunner said quietly, nodding toward his son's hand. Did you punch the ground when you landed? Ethan quickly pulled his hand under the sheet. Yeah, something like that. Clumsy. The lies were piling up, clumsy and suffocating. Gunner knew he couldn't push it here, not with them watching. He stood up, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder, giving it a slight squeeze. It was their old code. "I'm here. I've got your back." Ethan's eyes flickered to his for a moment, and in that fleeting glance, Gunner saw a desperate plea for help, quickly extinguished. He turned and walked out of the room, his face an unreadable mask of granite. He brushed past Evans without a word. The official channels were a dead end. The chain of command was compromised. His son was trapped and scared. This wasn't a training accident, this was something rotten. Something poisonous that had infected the heart of the Brotherhood. And as he walked back into the California sunshine, Gunner Henderson knew he couldn't fight this as a father. He had to fight it the only way he knew how. He had to become a hunter again. Back in his truck, the engine idling, Gunner let the facade drop. A tremor ran through his hands, the residual shock of seeing his son, not just injured, but broken in spirit. The physical wounds would heal. He'd had worse himself. But the fear in Ethan's eyes, that was a poison that could rot a man from the inside out. He wasn't just fighting Thorne and Evans anymore. He was fighting for his son's soul. He pulled out his phone. The contact list was a ghost town of fallen comrades and men scattered to the winds by retirement. But a few names remained, a few who owed him, a few who still understood the real code, the one that superseded ranks and regulations, the unspoken law of the Brotherhood. He scrolled until he found the name, Wedge. Command Master Chief Marcus Wedge Riley, the senior enlisted leader for the entire Naval Special Warfare Command. He was the keeper of the flame, the man whose job it was to know everything that happened on his base, from a busted training budget to the whispers in the chow hall. He and Gunner had come up together, two young, dumb kids trying to survive Buddy S. They had shared freezing water, enemy fire, and the loss of friends. Their bond was forged in steel and blood. Gunner hit the call button. Wedge picked up on the second ring. "Gunner, don't tell me you're calling to finally pay me that $50 you owe me from that poker game in '03. Wedge's voice boomed, warm and familiar. "Double or nothing next time I see you," Gunner said, the old banter a comforting ritual. "Listen, Wedge, I need to talk, off the books." The warmth in Wedge's voice instantly vanished, replaced by crisp professionalism. He knew that tone. "Where?" "The old spot. 30 minutes. See you there." The old spot was a dusty, wind-swept observation point on the Silver Strand, a narrow strip of land connecting Coronado to the mainland. It overlooked the vast Pacific on one side and the sprawling training grounds of the base on the other. It was where they came to think, to mourn, to speak truths that couldn't be spoken within the confines of the compound. Wedge was already there, leaning against his truck, a bear of a man whose easy smile did little to hide the intelligence in his eyes. He didn't say a word as Gunner pulled up. He just watched him get out, saw the grim set of his jaw. "It's Ethan, isn't it?" Wedge said, his voice low. Gunner nodded, staring out at the ocean. "They're calling it a training accident. A hard landing. It's a lie. I saw him. Concussion, yeah, but other things too. Bruises, scraped knuckles. And he's scared. Wedge, my kid doesn't get scared." Wedge let out a long, slow breath, kicking at a loose rock. "Thorne," he said, "it wasn't a question." "You know about this." Gunner's head snapped around, his eyes blazing. "I know rumors," Wedge admitted, his face troubled. "Whispers. Thorne calls it the Crucible, unsanctioned stress inoculation for the new guys in his platoon. He thinks Buddy S. has gotten soft. He thinks he needs to weed out the weak ones his own way. No official complaints have ever been filed. The guys are too terrified of him. And Evans, he's more interested in his next fitness report than the welfare of his men. He lets Thorne do whatever he wants as long as the platoon's training scores stay high." The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture more ugly than Gunner had imagined. It wasn't random violence, it was a system. A rogue philosophy of abuse masquerading as elite training, sanctioned by a weak officer and enforced by a sadistic senior chief. "So why hasn't anything been done?" Gunner demanded, his voice tight with fury. "Rumors aren't evidence, Gunner. You know that," Wedge said, his voice heavy with frustration. "I can't go to the Commodore with whispers. Thorne is a legend, in his own way, decorated, feared. To go after him, I need something concrete, something that will stick. A first-hand witness who will go on the record. And no one will talk," Gunner finished for him. "Because they know Thorne will destroy their career, maybe worse. Exactly, they see it as a rite of passage. You survive Thorne's welcome, you're in. You complain, You're a pariah for the rest of your time in the teams. It's a cancer." Gunner felt a wave of helplessness wash over him, quickly replaced by cold resolve. If no one inside would talk, he would have to find a crack from the outside. "There was a medic at the infirmary," Gunner said, thinking back. "A young lieutenant. He tried to stop me from seeing Ethan. He looked nervous." "Doc Miller," Wedge supplied. "Good kid. By the book." "The book can be a shield," Gunner mused. "But it also has rules about patient care and accurate reporting." Thorne and Evans would have had to give Miller a story for Ethan's injuries. A story that a good doctor might find questionable. A plan began to form in Gunner's mind, a risky, unorthodox plan that relied on instinct and his deep understanding of the men who wore the trident. "Wedge, I need you to do something for me," Gunner said, his eyes fixed on the distant Team 5 compound. "I need you to arrange another meeting with my son, official, on the books. In Evans's office. I want Evans there, and I want Thorne there. I want them all in a room, and I want it to happen tomorrow." Wedge looked at him, a questioning look in his eyes. "What are you planning, Gunner?" "You go in there hot. You'll only make things worse for Ethan." "I'm not going in hot," Gunner said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time that day. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want, a concerned father. But while I'm distracting the wolves, I need you to have a little chat with Doc Miller and a few of the other junior guys in Ethan's platoon. Not as the command Master Chief, but as an old friend. See what they say when they think no one is listening." Wedge nodded slowly, understanding. It was a classic pincer movement. Gunner would draw their fire, make them focus on him and Ethan. Meanwhile, Wedge would probe the flanks, looking for the weak link in their wall of silence. "It's a long shot," Wedge said. "It's the only shot I've got," Gunner replied, turning to look back at the base. "They've locked my son in a cage. Tomorrow, I'm going to rattle it." The meeting was set for 1400 in Evans's office. The room felt even smaller than the day before, charged with a palpable tension. Evans sat behind his desk, trying to project an aura of command he didn't possess. Thorne stood in the corner, arms crossed, a smug, menacing statue. Ethan sat in a chair beside the desk, his face pale, his posture rigid. He looked better, but the haunted look in his eyes remained. Gunner walked in and took the only other chair, positioning it so he could see all three of them. He wasn't the furious father from yesterday. He was calm, measured, his voice quiet. He had come to play a role. "Thank you for arranging this, Commander," Gunner began, his tone respectful. "I realize I was agitated yesterday. A father's worrying, you understand." Evans visibly relaxed. This, he could handle. "Of course, Master Chief, completely understandable. I just wanted to see Ethan for myself, hear from him that he's all right," Gunner continued, turning his attention to his son. "So, son, tell me again what happened. You were on a night jump." Ethan shifted in his chair, his eyes darting towards Thorne for a microsecond. "Yes, Dad, routine jump, equipment check. Everything was fine. Just came in too hard on the landing. Twisted my ankle, hit my head. My fault. I wasn't paying attention." The words were flat, memorized. "And your knuckles?" Gunner asked gently. "I put my hands out to break the fall. Scraped them on the tarmac," Ethan mumbled, looking at the floor. It was a plausible lie, not a good one, but plausible enough to fill out an incident report. Gunner could see the smug satisfaction on Thorne's face. They thought they had one. They thought the old man was placated, the kid was silenced, and their dirty little secret was safe. "All right, son," Gunner said, leaning forward slightly. He lowered his voice, making it personal, a conversation just between them, though he knew the others were listening intently. "You know, when I was a new guy in the teams, we had a saying. Pay the man. It meant you paid your dues. You did the work, you took the hits, you never complained. It's how you earned respect. Is that what this is, Ethan? Are you just paying the man?" Ethan's head came up, his eyes meeting his father's. In that moment, the sterile office disappeared. It was just the two of them. Gunner was giving him an out, a way to frame his silence in the language of their warrior culture, but it was also a test. A question. Are you enduring this, or are you a victim? "I'm just doing my job, Dad," Ethan said, his voice quiet, but firm. "I'm earning my place." A flicker of pride mixed with the agony in Gunner's chest. His son was not broken, He was caged, but he was not broken. He was enduring, holding on to his honor the only way he knew how. Gunner stood up. Okay, that's all I needed to hear. He turned to Evans. Thank you for your time, Commander. I appreciate you clearing this up for me. He walked to the door, then paused, turning back as if with an afterthought. He looked directly at Thorne. Senior Chief, he said, his voice friendly. You run a tight ship, I can see that. But you know, things change. The new generation, they're different. Smarter, maybe, less tolerant of the old ways. You be careful the lessons you're teaching don't come back to bite you. Thorne's eyes narrowed. The veiled threat hung in the air like cordite. Then Gunner was gone. He walked out into the sunshine, his heart a leaden weight. He had played his part. He had confirmed his suspicions and sent a message to Thorne, but he hadn't helped his son. He felt like he had just walked away from a prisoner, leaving him in his cell. He got back to his truck and sat there, the engine off, staring at the compound. Minutes ticked by. 10, 15. His phone buzzed. It was Wedge. Talk to me, Gunner said, his voice raw. You were right. Wedge's voice was grim. Doc Miller was evasive. Said he was ordered by Evans to write up the report exactly as he was told. He mentioned multiple contusions consistent with blunt force trauma, not a fall. He was scared, Gunner, but he's a good officer. His conscience is eating at him. What about the platoon? I talked to two of the new guys, a kid named Rico and another named Sanchez. They wouldn't say anything directly, but their eyes, Gunner, they looked like Poe's. When I mentioned Thorne's name, they flinched. Rico asked me, hypothetically, what would happen to a SEAL who filed a complaint against a senior chief? He called it career suicide. Gunner closed his eyes. So that was it, a wall of fear, built brick by brick. Thorne was the warden, Evans was the guard, and the rest of the platoon were prisoners, too afraid to speak out. It's not enough, is it? Gunner said, already knowing the answer. It's not, Wedge confirmed. It's all hearsay and worried looks. An official NCIS investigation would get stonewalled. Thorne would threaten the kids into silence. Evans would produce his doctored reports. It would be their word against a bunch of scared petty officers. And in the court of Navy opinion, the decorated senior chief wins. A cold rage, clean and pure, settled over Gunner. He had tried the subtle approach, he had tried using the system. But the system was rigged, the cancer was too deep. He started the truck's engine, the powerful roar reflection of the storm inside him. Then we're done playing by their rules, Gunner said, his voice like flint. What are you going to do? Wedge asked, a note of alarm in his voice. Don't do anything that's going to get you thrown in the brig, old man. Thorne has his crucible, Gunner said, pulling the truck into gear. He wants to test my son. He wants to see if he'll break. Well, he's about to find out what happens when you corner a lion's cub. You get the lion. He didn't know how, and he didn't know when. But he knew, with every fiber of his being, that Rex Thorne was going to run one more test on his son. And Gunner Henderson would be there for the final exam. The days following the meeting were a new kind of hell for Ethan. Thorne, enraged by Gunner's thinly veiled threat, saw it as a direct challenge to his authority. He interpreted Ethan's silence not as strength, but as a temporary reprieve but by his father's reputation. The senior chief's mission now was to break Ethan completely, to prove that no legacy could protect him from his lessons. The regular platoon training became a private torture chamber for Ethan. During runs, his pack was secretly loaded with extra sandbags. During ocean swims, his navigation board would mysteriously fail, forcing him to fight the currents alone. During shooting drills, Thorne would stand behind him, his voice a constant, venomous whisper. Your daddy coming to hold your hand, Henderson. You gotta cry for him when real bullets start flying. Ethan took it all. He bit his tongue until it bled. He pushed his body until black spots danced in his vision. He was isolated, the other new guys avoiding him, afraid of catching the same heat. The kid, Rico, would sometimes catch his eye, a look of pained sympathy in his face, but he never said a word. The platoon was a powder keg, and Ethan was the fuse. Meanwhile, Gunner was a ghost, haunting the edges of the base. He spent his days at a coffee shop in Imperial Beach, a place frequented by off-duty sailors and instructors. He listened, he watched. He used the network, which had opened for him, having quiet, 5-minute conversations with old acquaintance supply clerks, armorers, boat captains. He wasn't asking about Thorn directly. He was asking about training schedules, about platoon movements, about night exercises. He was gathering intelligence, building a pattern, a rhythm of the platoon's life. He learned about Thorn's favorite classroom, the Dunker, an indoor training pool used to simulate helicopter crashes and submerged escapes. It was a place of controlled chaos and primal fear. It was isolated, soundproofed, and rarely used by teams at night, without a full cadre of safety officers present. Thorn, he heard, liked to book it for private remedial training. No safety officers needed. Gunner knew that's where it would end. The final test would be in the water. Drowning was the great equalizer, the ultimate test of ASEAL's composure. He got the call on a Thursday night from a jumpy intelligence specialist who owed him a favor from years ago. "Master Chief," the kid whispered over the phone. "Thorn just booked the Dunker facility. 10 p.m. tonight, unofficial gear checkout. Just him and the new guys from his platoon. The log says extra breath hold exercises. Sir, it feels wrong." "You did good, son," Gunner said, his voice calm, betraying none of the adrenaline that shot through his veins. "Now forget you ever made this call." He immediately dialed Wedge. "It's tonight, the Dunker, 10 o'clock. I'll get a security team. We'll go in." "No," Gunner cut him off. "A formal raid will just give them time to cook up a story. It'll be a mess of jurisdictional nonsense. This needs to be handled differently. Get down there, Wedge. But stay out of sight. Be my witness. This ends tonight, brother to brother." There was a long pause. "God damn it, Gunner. Don't get yourself killed." "Not on the schedule," Gunner said, and hung up. At 10:15 p.m., the air inside the Dunker facility was thick with the smell of chlorine and fear. The massive pool was a dark, churning maw under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ethan and the 3 other new guys, including Rico, stood shivering in their swim trunks, their hands tied behind their backs with zip ties. Thorn circled them like a shark, a stopwatch in his hand. LCDR Evans was there, too, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, his face pale. He was an observer, a complicit coward. "The enemy doesn't care if you're tired," Thorn growled, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. "They don't care if your hands are tied. They will put you in a dark hole filled with water, and they will wait for you to break. I am your enemy tonight. I am here to find out who has the will to live, and who is just taking up space in my platoon." He looked directly at Ethan. "Tonight, Henderson, we find out if you're really your father's son." He pointed to the first man. "Go." The young SEAL was pushed to the edge of the pool and kicked in. He bobbed to the surface, gasping, trying to stay afloat by kicking his legs. "Now," Thorn said calmly, "we see how you handle stress." He nodded to one of his loyal senior guys, who picked up a fire hose and blasted the man in the face with a high-pressure stream of water. The man sputtered, swallowed water, and began to sink. After a terrifying 10 seconds, Thorn nodded, and the man was hauled out, coughing and vomiting. One by one, they were subjected to the ordeal. It wasn't training, it was torture. Finally, it was Ethan's turn. He looked at Thorn, his eyes clear, his jaw set. There was no fear left, only defiance. He was pushed into the water. The cold was a shock, but he forced himself to relax, to float, to control his breathing. Thorn nodded. The fire hose erupted, a brutal, concussive force hitting him in the face, driving him under. He fought his way back to the surface, gasping for air, only to be hit again. The world became a confusing chaos of roaring water, burning lungs, and the laughter of Thorn's cronies. But he wouldn't quit. He thought of his father. He thought of the trident. He kept fighting. Thorn was getting angry. This wasn't going as planned. Henderson wasn't breaking. He was just enduring. "Hold him under," Thorn roared. 2 of the senior guys grabbed a long pole with a loop at the end, forced it over Ethan's head, and pushed him deep beneath the surface. Ethan's world went dark and silent. His lungs screamed. Panic, cold and absolute, began to claw at him. He thrashed, but his bound hands were useless. "That's enough." The voice cut through the tension. It was Rico. He had stepped forward, his face a mask of fury and shame. "Senior Chief, this isn't training. This is gonna kill him." Thorn turned slowly, a look of pure disbelief on his face. "What did you just say to me, petty officer?" I said. "That's enough," Rico shouted, taking another step. Thorn smiled, a truly terrifying sight. Well, we have a hero, he turned to his men. Get Henderson out. Looks like Rico wants to volunteer for the advanced course. They hauled Ethan out. He collapsed on the deck, coughing violently, his vision blurry. He looked up just as Thorn decked Rico with a single, brutal punch. Rico went down hard, his head cracking against the wet tile. Thorn stood over him. In my platoon, we don't have heroes. We have warriors, and we have traitors. He kicked Rico in the ribs. Something inside Ethan snapped. It wasn't a conscious thought, it was pure, primal instinct. He saw a brother go down for him. He saw the rot, the corruption, the dishonor of it all. With a roar, he launched himself off the floor, still dripping, hands still bound, and speared Thorn with his shoulder, driving him back. The shock of the attack sent Thorn stumbling. The other SEALs just stood there, stunned into inaction. For a moment, it was just Ethan and Thorn. The fight was savage and desperate. Ethan, with his hands tied, used his head, his shoulders, his feet. Thorn, a master of dirty fighting, used his fists, his elbows, his knees. It was a losing battle for Ethan, but he didn't care. He was fighting for Rico. He was fighting for himself. He was fighting for the very idea of what a SEAL was supposed to be. Thorn landed a vicious blow to Ethan's side, and he crumpled to the ground, the air driven from his lungs. Thorn stood over him, his chest heaving, a look of murderous rage in his eyes. He drew back his foot to deliver a final, vicious kick to Ethan's head. Bang! The massive steel door of the facility crashed open, slamming against the wall with the force of a bomb blast. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim lights of the corridor behind him, stood Gunner Henderson. He wasn't alone. Flanking him was Command Master Chief Wedge Riley. The tableau froze, Thorn with his foot raised. Ethan and Rico on the ground, Evans, plastered against the far wall, his face the color of ash. Gunner took one step into the room, his eyes, cold as the deep ocean, swept over the scene. They took in his son's bruised and bleeding body. They saw Rico, unconscious. They saw the zip ties, the fire hose, and then they locked onto Senior Chief Rex Thorn. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. It was a silence filled with 25 years of combat, of sacrifice, of honor. And in that silence, every man in the room knew that judgment had arrived. Gunner walked slowly, deliberately, onto the pool deck. His boots echoed in the cavernous space. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. The fury that had been simmering for days was now forged into something cold, hard, and infinitely more dangerous. Absolute purpose. Wedge followed a few paces behind, his presence an official seal on the proceedings. His face was grim, his eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful anger. Gunner walked past the senior guys who had been Thorn's accomplices. They flinched and looked away as he passed, unable to meet the gaze of the living legend they had just betrayed. He walked past LCDR Evans, who seemed to shrink against the wall, trying to disappear. Gunner didn't even grant him a glance. He was irrelevant, a coward. He stopped first at Rico's side, kneeling down. He checked the young man's pulse, saw the gash on the back of his head. He looked up at Wedge. Get a corpsman down here. Now, Wedge was already on his radio, his voice a low, urgent command. Then, Gunner went to his son. He knelt beside Ethan, who was pushing himself up on one elbow, his breathing ragged. Gunner took a combat knife from the sheath on his belt and, with one clean slice, cut the zip tie binding Ethan's hands. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't need to. He placed a hand on the back of Ethan's neck, a brief, powerful gesture of pride, of acknowledgement, of love. He then helped his son to his feet, propping him up. Only then, with his son safe at his side, did Gunner turn to face Thorn. Thorn had lowered his foot. The murderous rage was gone, replaced by a sullen, cornered defiance. He stood his ground, trying to project the authority that had evaporated the moment Gunner walked through that door. "Henderson," Thorn spat, trying to sound dismissive. "Come to check on your little boy?" Gunner took a step closer, his eyes boring into Thorn. His voice, when it came, was quiet. It was not the bark of a Master Chief, it was the whisper of a killer. "You wear the trident on your chest," Gunner said, his voice dangerously soft. "The same one I bled for, the same one better men than you have died for. It's supposed to mean something. It's supposed to mean honor, Courage, commitment. It's supposed to mean you never, ever leave a man behind. He took another step. They were almost chest to chest now. But you don't build men, you break them. You're not a leader. You're a bully. You're not forging warriors. You're a predator, feasting on the young of your own pack. You confuse cruelty with strength. You are a disgrace to this uniform, to this brotherhood, and to the memory of every operator who ever drew breath. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Thorne's entire identity. This wasn't a challenge of rank or physical strength. It was a judgment of his very soul, delivered by a man who embodied everything Thorne pretended to be. Thorne's face contorted in a snarl. I made them strong. You made them afraid, Gunner interrupted, his voice rising just a fraction, laced with steel. You taught them that the enemy was in their own ranks. You taught them to be silent in the face of evil. That is the lesson of a coward. Gunner turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on LCDR Evans. And you, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. You let it happen. You stood by and watched this cancer grow in your own platoon because you were too scared, too ambitious, too weak to do the job you swore an oath to do. You're not fit to lead men. You're not fit to wear the uniform. He turned back to Thorne. It's over, Rex. Just then, the doors burst open again. This time, it wasn't one man. It was a team of uniformed base security, led by a stone-faced NCIS agent in civilian clothes. Wedge had made the call. The agent walked forward, his eyes taking in the scene. He looked at Wedge, who gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The agent looked at Thorne and Evans. Senior Chief Thorne, Lieutenant Commander Evans, you're to come with me. NCIS is opening an official investigation into allegations of assault, hazing, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The fight drained out of Thorne. In that moment, he was just a man whose time had run out. His reign of terror, conducted in the shadows of the compound, was over, exposed in the harsh fluorescent lights of the pool. As they were led away, Gunner put a steadying arm around his son. Let's get you to the infirmary, he said, his voice finally losing its hard edge, replaced by the simple concern of a father. Ethan leaned on him, the adrenaline fading, leaving only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Rico, he managed to say. He stood up for me. I know, Gunner said, looking over at the young man now being tended to by medics. That's what honor looks like. In the aftermath, the silent wall of the compound crumbled. The NCIS investigation, spearheaded by Wedge's official testimony and Gunner's statement, was swift and decisive. With Thorne and his cronies removed from power, Rico, Ethan, and the other junior SEALs felt safe enough to tell the truth. They spoke of the systematic abuse, the culture of fear, and the night at the pool. Doc Miller submitted his original, undoctored medical notes as evidence. The case was airtight. LCDR Evans was dishonorably discharged, his once promising career ending in utter disgrace. Rex Thorne was court-martialed. Stripped of his rank and his precious trident, he was sentenced to serve time in the military prison at Leavenworth, a fallen tyrant destined to be nothing more than a cautionary tale. The entire command structure of SEAL Team 5 was shaken up. The Commodore, a man Gunner respected, brought him in not as a retiree, but as an advisor. Together, they began to implement Change's new oversight for platoon-level training, anonymous reporting channels, and a renewed emphasis on the mental and ethical well-being of the operators. Not just their physical prowess, the old ways of men like Thorne were officially declared relics of a bygone, toxic era. A few months later, Gunner stood on the same wine-swept bluff overlooking the Pacific where he had met with Wedge. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Beside him stood Ethan. The bruises had long since faded. The haunted look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that he had earned not at Buddy S., but in the chlorinated water of the Dunker. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the waves roll in. Rico is getting a commendation, Ethan said finally. They offered him a spot in any platoon he wants. He's staying with us. We're rebuilding. Good, Gunner said. A team built on a foundation like that, it'll be unbreakable. Ethan turned to face him. Gad, that night, why didn't you just come in swinging? I know you. I saw your face. You wanted to tear him apart. Gunner looked at his son, seeing not the boy he'd raised but the man he had become. Because that's what he would have done, he said softly. Thorne's power came from violence and fear. To beat him with his own tools would have been to admit that he was right. I needed to beat him with our code, with honor. I needed every man in that room to see the difference between a monster and a warrior. He put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. What you did fighting for Rico when you had nothing left, that was the greatest act of a warrior I've ever seen. You didn't just endure, you protected your brother. You made me more proud than any medal I've ever earned. Ethan's eyes welled up, and he finally let go of the rigid control he had held for so long. He embraced his father, a gesture of gratitude, of shared victory, of a bond that had been tested by fire and had emerged as tempered steel. The story of Gunner Henderson and the fall of Rex Thorne became a quiet legend within the teams. It wasn't a story of battlefield heroics, but of a different, more difficult kind of courage. It was a story about a father who refused to let his son be consumed by the darkness, and a son who taught his father the true meaning of strength. It served as a powerful reminder that the most dangerous enemies are sometimes the ones within your own ranks, and that true honor isn't found in enduring abuse, but in having the courage to stand against it. The real crucible wasn't the one Thorne created in the pool. It was the choice each man had to make between silence and speaking the truth. I hope this story resonated with you. The bond between a parent and child, and the courage to stand up for what is right, are timeless themes. If you've ever had to fight a silent battle for someone you love, let us know your story in the comments below. Your experiences give strength to others. And if this story moved you, please consider hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing for more stories about the everyday heroes who walk among us. Thank you for watching.